Hello my dear friends, you're in the military summary channel. In this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. First we're going to start with Zaporyzhzhia area, with the area in the vicinity of Pyatikhatki. From these directions, the Russians reported that as a result of counter-offensive operation, a very small counter-offensive operation that we discussed yesterday, the Russians were developing their bridgehead in direction of Lapkova from south of Kupyansk, trying to cut the supply road that goes, that Ukrainians, to be more precise, that Ukrainians use from Kamyansk in direction of Lapkova and Pyatikhatki, so this one. And as I understand, as a result of that attack, the Russians managed to establish physical control or even fire control over this road, and currently the Ukrainians lost their possibilities to get support from Kamyansk. And now they need to make a very big hook from this area to get Stepovo, and after get that from Stepovo to go to Lapkova and Pyatikhatki. So that was a very important operational or even tactical success from the Russian side. And the Russians also continue pushing the Ukrainians between Malye Sherbaki and Stepovo from the south. This is the second area in a row from this area. Yesterday we discussed how the Russians were attacking the Ukrainian positions, that they managed to discover the Ukrainian reconnaissance team and to destroy their small operational warehouse among the forest lines. So as you can see, basically, currently we see the entire picture of this bridgehead. The Russians are not attacking, they took a decision to change their tactic, and they're not using like front attack, they're using to attack the flanks tactics of attack. And as you can see, the Russians have already established fire control and physical control over the western supply road that goes from Kamyansk to Lapkova and Pyatikhatki, and now the Russians have increased their pressure from Konovalova in direction of Malye Sherbaki with one purpose: to develop the bridgehead to get as close as possible to the second supply road that Ukrainians used to support their forces in Stepovo and Pyatikhatki, this one. And if the Russians are able to advance another kilometer to the north, we understand that they will be able to establish another control, physical or fire control over this area, and then the Ukrainians can lose the entire support of their forces in Lapkova Pyatikhatki. So this is the tactic and this is the purpose of the Russian forces on this bridgehead. Now we are moving to Orikhiv area. The Ukrainians continue to develop their bridgehead in the salient on the north of Robotyne. All the Ukrainians' attempts to attack the Russian forces were repelled, but that was something like reconnaissance in combat, or probably even reconnaissance in force, and trying to slow down and pin down the Russians, while the main Ukrainian engineering forces were making the mining process and completed the establishing of Ukrainian fortifications. Furthermore, the Ukrainians published very interesting video from Novopokrovka. The Ukrainian claims that this is the video and evidence of usage of Ukrainian air forces in this small settlement. The Ukrainians were bombed this area using the Su-25 aircrafts, but we haven't seen Su-25. Maybe the Ukrainians were using something like they were testing their own guided bombs or something like this with very low power. Who knows? But so as you can see, the Ukrainians also continue their attacking in direction between Malotokmachka, Belogorye, and Novopokrovka. But the reasons of that attack, it's probably unknown. Now we are moving to Orikhiv bridgehead. The Russian claims that as a result of counter-offensive operation that was launched yesterday in the evening, the Russians managed to restore their positions on the north of Pyryutina, and the Russians managed to return control over the bridgehead between the river and this small settlement Pyryutina. So basically, as a result of that counter-attack, the Russians restored positions along the river and returned control over this bridgehead. Basically, this is, I don't think that this is something like a very big counter-offensive operation in the direction of Novodarivka and Rovnopol. Basically, this is like a attempt from the Russian side to maintain the gray zone and just to, before the upcoming Ukrainian counter-offensive operation, just maintaining the gray zone with the purpose to reduce the Ukrainian possibilities to counter-attack. Also, the Russians published the video how the Ukrainians started using the cluster rounds in this area in the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. This video is not accurately geolocated, just there was the report from the Russian sources that Ukrainians started using cluster rounds on this bridgehead as well. Now we're moving to the south. The Ukrainians continue counter-artillery duels, and as a result of one of those battles, the Russians lost another Gyatsin artillery system. That system was discovered and tracked by the Ukrainians, and after that, with accurate attack, that system was destroyed by the Ukrainian artillery system. Now we are moving to Uglydar area. The Russians published more details the battle during the previous day, after the Ukrainians were completely defeated as a result of their counter-offensive operation. The Ukrainians were forced to leave a lot of armored vehicles among the fields. The Russians also understand that they don't have chances to evacuate these vehicles, and maybe there is a very high chances that every single vehicle was mined by the Ukrainians, so there was no purpose to do this. So the Russians took a decision to destroy the vehicles using Lancet drone. We haven't received any updates from the coal mine on the south of Krasnogorovka. As I understand, the Russians still control this area, and the every Ukrainian attempt to counterattack was repelled. And now we are moving to Avdeevka. The Russians launched offensive operation, as we discussed yesterday, and as a result of that attack, we got more updates and confirmation that the Russians managed to return control and to maintain the gray zone. Probably the Russians managed to return control over the forest lines on the west of Krasnogorovka, over the forest lines between Veselaya and Krasnogorovka, and furthermore the Russians reported that they managed to restore control over the western part of Veselaya, over this part. This area used to be either in the gray zone or under Ukrainian control. So for now, the Russians haven't managed to capture new territories, new sectors, but anyway, they managed to restore their lost positions. It's also a very good result. Now we are moving to Klishchiivka area, and today we got a lot of very interesting updates from this bridgehead. For example, the Russians reported that at 11 a.m. of the local time yesterday, it's very difficult to understand this real situation in Klishchiivka, but the Russians reported that they managed to, to return control over the southwestern part of the village. So basically, according to that report, yesterday the Ukrainians made more attempts to enter the settlement, and probably some Ukrainian forces were able to get not just inside of the forest, but also inside of the southwestern part of the village. The Russians launched a counter-offensive operation, and by 11 a.m. of the local time yesterday, the Ukrainians were forced to leave the southwestern part of fortification. Basically, that means that as a result of clashes during the previous days, the Ukrainians did manage to enter and to create or capture this sector, or at least to make it as a gray zone. So basically, the evidence and video and photo geolocations confirms that the Ukrainians managed to enter not just the fortifications that located in the vicinity of Klishchiivka, but inside of Klishchiivka itself. Furthermore, the Ukrainians made more attempts to develop their offensive operation in direction of Andreevka, but the Russians hold their positions. As you can see, there were at least 2 tanks in this area who were trying to repel the Ukrainians' attack, and at some moment the Ukrainians took a decision to change their tactics, and they started bombing and shelling and attacking those tanks in the vicinity of Andreevka using just regular drones. I'm not sure that of results of of usage of that tactic, but we'll see. Anyways, you can see the tank was damaged. We don't see any further video about the results of that attack. Also, the Ukrainians were trying to, as soon as they captured the northwestern fortification, northwestern front area, the Ukrainians started bombing and shelling the village. So this is the second evidence that Ukrainians either entered the settlement and started destroying and attacking with artillery rounds the Russian positions, Russian strongholds inside the village. So basically, the battle for Klishchiivka itself has started, and I'm not sure that this battle is going to take too long, but something tells me that the Russians maybe will be forced to step back from this fortification within the next few weeks. Not because of the fact that the Russians would be defeated, but as a result that from this meaning, maybe and probably the Russians will count and think that the village doesn't have any value for them, and it's better for them to step back towards more reliable positions somewhere in the vicinity of Opytne. Because in Opytne and from this bridgehead, no matter that this area is located on the lowland, it is much more easier to defend themselves, because for the Ukrainians, they will have to cross the railroad ways in this area. Of course, they will have some superiority in artillery, and they will have the Russian positions, right in front of them, but anyway, you are able to attack the Russian positions with artillery just for some period of time, and later anyway you're gonna have to send your infantry and armored vehicles that need to cross the railroad ways and all these territories under complete Russian artillery control. So we'll see. Furthermore, the Russians published the video of Ukrainian attack in the vicinity of Berkhivka. That was a very powerful offensive operation from the Ukrainian side. The Russians were bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions using artillery system of type of weapon they have, tanks and so on. The Ukrainians had a lot of losses, but some Russian military experts confirmed that as a result of that, the final last Ukrainian attack, the Ukrainians managed to develop their bridgehead and to capture some forest lines between Berkhivka water reservoir and Yagidne and this area. So basically this small square is currently in the gray zone, or at least under Ukrainian control. Also, the Ukrainians continue their counter-artillery duels, and that supports the Russian forces and that attacked the Ukrainian forces during their offensive operation. On this video, we see how the Ukrainians destroy another Russian D-20 or D-30 howitzer. Finally, and very interesting updates are coming from Razdolovka, Veselaya, Berestova bridgehead. The Ukrainians from their side published another video, 10th Mountain Assault Brigade published another video how they were attacking and bombing the Russian forces who were hiding in between the trenches and the strongholds. On this video, we see another series of Ukrainian attack with drones. As we can see, this is a very powerful squad of Ukrainian drone forces. It's a very important, very powerful asset. And the Russians also published very interesting video, and I was surprised when I saw the Russian video. For example, this is the icon. On this video, we see how the Russian T-90 tank was attacking the Ukrainian positions, and the author of that video claimed that that was exactly attack of Russian tank. And the author also added description to this video saying that using the T-90 tank, the Russians managed to destroy the entire Ukrainian fortification and Ukrainian position exactly in this video. This area is geolocated. Well, let's use this. As you can see, there is a forest on the bottom of this video, there is a forest line and a few valleys, and we can find them on this map as well. This is the forest, this is the valleys, this is the forest line. So if we try to calculate the distance from this area that was attacked by the Russian tank and the closest Russian positions, let's say in the vicinity of Razdolovka, the distance is around 5 kilometers. So imagine yourself the type of weapon that the Russians have if they are able to attack the Ukrainian positions from hidden positions in the distance of 5 kilometers. It's a very powerful weapon, T-90 tanks, and as you can see, the Russians started bombing and shelling the Ukrainian support roads that the Ukrainians are using and were using for moving some reserve reinforcements in direction of Veselaya, in direction of positions of 10th Mountain Assault Brigade that's during the previous 2 weeks were bombing and shelling the Russian positions in the vicinity of railroad ways. So basically, as I understand, the Russians finally took a decision to start bombing and shelling these positions and somehow to help the Russian forces in the vicinity of Berestova and Belogorovka. Now we are moving further to the north, so we are going to Karamzinovka, to this area. Today we got more interesting geolocations. A lot of mappers have already updated their maps showing that the Russians managed to cross Zhiribec River. It's this information we discussed for many times, and not just cross the river, but also the Russians managed to capture at least 3 forests in this area, the northern, central, and a series of forests on the south. So as you can see, the Russians managed to prepare a very powerful bridgehead. For now, it's very difficult to understand how many tanks and heavy armored vehicles the Russians managed to deploy on this side of the river. I believe that not so many. I think that this is an ongoing process, and the Russians currently sending more and more forces on this bridgehead, trying to develop this area in many directions. And as soon as the Russians are able to accumulate the critical mass, they will launch their offensive operation in direction of this small, let's say, agglomeration of the small villages to the west of this bridgehead, and trying to cut this area in 2 pieces. For now, as I understand, the Russians still haven't managed to accumulate the critical mass on this bridgehead. Also, we got another video confirmation of clashes in Novoselovsk, and this is another operation with the usage of T-90 tank, and this is another attack from the hidden position using the tank. and the Russians were attacking from a very big distance and from hidden positions, from unreachable positions for the Ukrainian forces, and as a result of a series of attacks, the Russians were supporting their own forces who were attacking and were trying to advance in the western and the central part of Novoselovskaya. So this is the results of those attacks. For now, the Russian sources are saying that they managed to capture entire Novoselovsk, but the Ukrainians claim that the Russians Ukrainians left the settlement, and that the western part is in the gray zone. Neither the Russians nor Ukrainians have entered the western part of that settlement. Very interesting updates are coming from Kupyansk front line. The Russians continue advancing, continue taking more and more territories under their control. They're pushing to the south, and there are some sources are saying that they have already started seeing the Kupyansk from their, let's say, positions. And the Ukrainians, according to Western reports, have started usage of cluster rounds in this bridgehead as well, because according to the Western sources and Ukrainian sources, this is the only type of weapon that Ukrainians can use to slow down and to stop the Russian advances on this bridgehead. The situation for the Ukrainians is very critical. As you can see, the Ukrainians were forced and currently are withdrawing their positions in the Kupyansk front line. The Ukrainians are withdrawing their positions in the vicinity of Novoselovskaya, and the Ukrainians lost and allowed the Russians to create a powerful bridgehead in the vicinity of Novovodiana and Karamzinovka. Situation is very critical, and cluster munition, cluster rounds is the only way for the Ukrainians how to slow down the Russians on this bridgehead. And that's it for this short video. Military summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.